Hello, everyone, and welcome to Dr. Mercola's Cellular Wisdom. I'm Ethan Foster, your resident connoisseur of curious observations and famously dry remarks. Today, we're shining a light on prostate health and that ever-elusive metabolic puzzle that seems to go hand in hand with aging. But maybe it doesn't have to.
And I'm Alara Sky, the one who merges comedic commentary with deep health insights, because, let's be honest, if we don't laugh about these things, we'd be stuck pondering them in the middle of the night. Speaking of nights, we'll be discussing those frequent bathroom visits that many men might wrongly chalk up to father time.
Indeed, because if there's one thing that's worse than having to check all the locks before you go to bed, it's having to check all the locks again and then still wake up at 3 a.m. because your bladder insists on an encore.
Well, I guess the plus side is that you get to admire your slippers multiple times each night. But jokes aside, we're going to dig into the topic of benign prostatic hyperplasia, or BPH, and explore whether it's truly the unstoppable force of aging that many have assumed, or if metabolic syndrome, with all its inflammatory hijinks, is calling the shots.
Right, because we've all heard the story. As men get older, the prostate just packs on pounds like it's Thanksgiving dinner every day. But newer research suggests otherwise. It's not only a matter of birthdays, but of metabolic health.
And metabolic health can be influenced by everything from what you eat to how stressed you get sitting in traffic every morning. It's like the body is one big interconnected system. Who would have thought?
Sarcasm noted. Ilara. Let's start with the fundamentals. BPH is so common that many men in their 60s and 70s assume it's just life's little tax. The prostate grows, the urinary tract gets squeezed, and the nighttime bathroom visits multiply. But as we'll discuss, the real culprit behind this creeping prostate inflation may be chronic inflammation tied to metabolic syndrome.
Yes, that cluster of conditions including insulin resistance, obesity, high blood pressure, and unhelpful lipid profiles. When you hear metabolic syndrome, imagine a backstage pass to a rock concert of inflammatory signals, except the show has no intermission and your prostate is the unlucky stage.
Exactly. Metabolic syndrome is basically the body's polite way of waving a red flag that says, hello, we might have an issue here. Also, your nightly routine might soon involve several pit stops.
Let's start with the biggest takeaway from recent studies. BPH might not be inevitable. It's strongly driven by inflammation and hormonal imbalances, particularly from an abundance of something called omega-6 fats. These are common in many vegetable oils and processed foods, so when you chow down on that deep-fried extravaganza, your prostate might not be applauding.
Researchers in Poland, bless them, took a deep dive and discovered elevated levels of inflammatory lipids in men with BPH. These lipids are derived from arachidonic acid and linoleic acid, your typical ringmasters of the inflammatory circus.
And leading the parade is 5-oxo-ETE, a particularly powerful molecule that ramps up inflammatory pathways. It's like an over-enthusiastic guest who shows up to the party and just won't leave.
Along with 12-HETE, 15-HETE, and 9-HODE. Each one gets fancier with every syllable. The gist, though, is that these molecules contribute to tissue expansion, scarring, oxidative stress, and new blood vessel formation. And while new blood vessels might sound lovely if you're painting a romantic portrait, in your prostate, it's more like building extra rooms onto a house that was already cramped.
Exactly. The more space you add to that house, the more likely it is to press down on your urethra, turning your nightly bathroom run into a nightly bathroom marathon.
What's fascinating is that the body does attempt to offset this inflammation with its own anti-inflammatory agents, known as resolvins, protectins, and maricins. They swoop in like the cavalry, but in men with BPH, they're often outnumbered by the inflammatory lipids. It's a biochemical Game of Thrones.
So if you're picturing a seesaw with inflammatory lipids on one side and anti-inflammatory mediators on the other, guess which side is winning in BPH?
Precisely. It's not that the body isn't trying, it's that the average diet and lifestyle just keep fueling the wrong side. So that's one big piece of the puzzle. Then we have studies showing how metabolic syndrome itself speeds up the progression of BPH.
Because where there's one troublemaker, the rest like to follow. Metabolic syndrome involves insulin resistance. That leads to higher insulin and IGF-1, which can overstimulate prostate cells.
Then you have obesity and high blood pressure. These contribute further stress on the system, altering hormonal balance and keeping the whole cycle churning.
Which is why the best approach is not just to treat the symptoms, like prescribing medication to reduce urinary urgency, but to dig deeper into metabolic health. That's the real lever you can pull to make a lasting difference.
Indeed. It's interesting to note that men who have metabolic syndrome with BPH are at a much higher risk of more severe urinary symptoms. And we're not talking about a minor annoyance, we're talking about men who might start planning their day around bathroom availability.
Absolutely. And let's not forget that central obesity, carrying excess fat around the waist, poses a higher risk for BPH than simply a higher BMI. This belly fat releases certain hormones and inflammatory chemicals that can target the prostate like a bullseye.
That might be why focusing on metabolic markers like cholesterol ratios, insulin levels, blood pressure, and waist circumference could give a clearer picture of whether BPH is looming on the horizon.
How do we turn the tide on this? Enter good old lifestyle strategies. It might sound cliche, but the fundamentals, reducing harmful fats, improving stress levels, tweaking your hormone balance, truly matter.
And let's unpack them one by one, starting with stress. Chronic stress leads to excess cortisol, which can perpetuate insulin resistance and stoke that inflammatory flame.
Because if you're already juggling 4 hours of sleep and a triple espresso habit, your body's basically auditioning for a meltdown. Stress is the secret saboteur here. Lowering stress can be as simple as learning deep breathing techniques or pausing to watch the sunset instead of complaining that it's in your eyes.
Another big culprit is the overconsumption of polyunsaturated fatty acids, particularly linoleic acid from vegetable oils. This is how those elevated inflammatory lipids often get their start in the body.
Let's all say it together. Thanks, vegetable oils. If you have a pantry lined with canola, soybean, or corn oil, your dinner might be giving your prostate an inflammatory pep talk. Switching to stable fats such as butter, tallow, or coconut oil can dramatically improve your metabolic markers over time.
And since we're talking about hormone balance, we can't ignore estrogen dominance. When men have an imbalance in their estrogen to testosterone ratio, the result can be that big balloon effect on the prostate.
Precisely. Excess estrogen can come from our environment, plastics, pesticides, hormone-laden foods, and it can also build up if the body isn't detoxifying properly. So maybe skip microwaving your lunch in that plastic container. Even your dishwasher might get suspicious if it constantly sees you with plastic everything.
The next piece of the puzzle is gut health, which might not sound related to the prostate on the surface, but it's vital. If your gut is inflamed, your whole system is on red alert. Strengthening the gut barrier through a balanced diet can reduce systemic inflammation.
Because if your gut is constantly being hammered by preservatives, artificial additives, and rancid oils, your immune system is going to be busy dealing with that. And it might just say, you know what? Let me make the prostate puffy too, just for good measure.
Yes, the body's sense of humor can be quite twisted that way. Let's not forget physical activity. Staying active, even if it's just brisk walks, can help keep insulin sensitivity in check and reduce those inflammatory markers.
And it doesn't have to be an Ironman competition. Simple moves, short workouts, even pacing around the house on a phone call can make a difference. The point is to keep the blood flowing, muscles working, and waistlines from expanding.
We've talked about BPH, its connection to metabolic syndrome, and how the synergy of inflammation, insulin resistance, obesity, and hormone imbalance can all conspire against your prostate. Let's address a few common questions about BPH and metabolic health from folks who want clarity.
Fire away, Ethan.
First question, is BPH just a natural part of aging?
The short answer is no, not necessarily. Sure, risk goes up with age, but it's more about metabolic dysfunction driving it. If you keep your inflammation and insulin in check, your prostate won't necessarily enlarge just because you had a certain number of birthdays.
Next question, how exactly does metabolic syndrome contribute to an overgrown prostate?
Metabolic syndrome brings insulin resistance, which leads to higher insulin and IGF-1. Together, those can play cheerleaders to prostate cells, urging them to multiply. Add obesity's inflammatory signals, and you have a perfect recipe for an out-of-control prostate.
Another question, can my diet really make a difference?
Absolutely. If you eat a ton of omega-6 fat, you're more likely to stoke chronic inflammation. Think of it as choosing the logs you put on a fire. Toss in wet logs, healthier fats, and you won't get much of a blaze. Throw in bone-dry tinder, excess omega-6, and you'll be scorching your system in no time.
One more, what's the best natural way to calm prostate inflammation?
The best way is to get your metabolism sorted out. Address insulin resistance, clean up your diet, favor stable fats, manage stress, consider ways to reduce estrogenic exposures, and keep that gut happy. It might sound like a lot, but each small step can yield big dividends in your prostate's well-being.
The nice thing is that all of these steps will benefit your entire body, not just your prostate. You get a 2-for-1, less frequent bathroom breaks, plus overall better health.
Exactly. And it's not just about fewer sprints to the restroom. It's about real longevity. Your cells basically saying, thank you for not suffocating us in an endless wave of inflammatory molecules.
Before we wrap up, I think a quick recap is in order. We've learned that BPH may be common, but it isn't automatically your destiny. Metabolic syndrome, marked by insulin resistance, obesity, high blood pressure, and messy lipid profiles, it can drive inflammation that expands the prostate.
And that's where lifestyle changes come in. Don't rely purely on symptomatic fixes when you can target the root cause. Keep stress in check, limit polyunsaturated fats, watch out for estrogen overload, strengthen your gut, and keep moving.
Each positive habit you adopt is a step toward keeping that prostate from staging a hostile takeover of your urinary tract.
Well put, Ethan. And on that note, let's remind everyone that the entire point of this show is to empower you with the knowledge, plus a few good laughs, so you can put it to good use in your own life.
Indeed. Because there's something to be said for waking up in the morning and realizing you actually stayed in bed all night. It's an underrated joy.
And your slippers will still be there waiting, except you won't need to see them at 2 a.m. anymore.
Precisely. Well, thanks for joining us on this journey through the intricate world of metabolic health and the surprisingly relevant details of prostate enlargement.
Thanks for joining us on Dr. Mercola's Cellular Wisdom. Remember, health isn't just about dealing with symptoms. It's about fine-tuning the entire body so those symptoms never show up uninvited.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Thank you for listening. I'm Ethan Foster.
And I'm Alara Sky. Take care, eat well, de-stress, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for watching. Subscribe now and click the notification bell so you never miss an update. See you in the next video.